One administrative thing. Don't know if you got updated already by the instructors, but we're moving to a pace of one homework a week. Okay, so the homeworks will be shorter, slightly shorter than what you already got, but you will be required to submit them. Sorry. No, that's exactly what I wanted to avoid. You'll be required to submit them every week. And the reason for this is we want to help you to keep on track. It's very easy to lose track of things in our programming course, so we really want to help you. For the same reason, okay, the fact we want to help you, we're going to apply a harsh policy on delays to submit exercises. So you'll be required, of course, to submit the exercise on time. If someone, for some reason, has difficulty to submit one exercise on time, you can email us. We will give extensions, but we will give the extension only if you request for one before the date of the submission. Okay? So don't send us a request for a extension after the exam. Okay? I mean, I really want to make this point clear. I've received in the past requests for extensions after Moed Aleph by people who realized that they hadn't submitted all the exercises and they needed for their final grades to be a pass one. So this will not work in this course, okay? So I'm saying it again, we'll give extensions if someone has occasionally difficulty submitting the exercises on time, but and we will be generous with this, but only if you request it on time. Okay? Good. So I've made the font larger today. I hope it will do the work. So שאלה? Okay, so let's start. So last time we discussed booleans, okay, and we finished 5 minutes late, and I told you that we will have a few more things to discuss on booleans, so let's do this now. So if you remember, the last thing we discussed last time was the is operator, okay? So I'm going to give a bit of context. So we define this variable, for example, weather, okay? And we wanted to make an if statement, checking if the weather is equal to stormy, okay? So I wrote if weather is stormy, print there is a storm, else print no storm. Okay, so let's run this, and of course it's recognizing that the weather variable is equal to stormy, and so it's making this this part of the statement. Now, and then we discussed the fact that here I could put a bunch of other operators. Non-equal would be this, okay? And in the case of numerical values, I have greater than, lower than. You remember, these are things we talked about, I think, in the first lecture. Now, there is an operator called the is operator, and I want to show you now what it's doing. Do you see now? I've increased the font quite a lot, so everybody sees. You over there. What's your name again?
Me?
Ken.
Johan.
No. Behind. Yes.
Sagi.
סגי. אז אתה ביקשת שאתה רואה עכשיו? אני הגדלתי את זה בהרבה.
בהגדרות?
מה?
בהגדרות?
האמת, כן, בהגדרות. הדבר הבא זה שאתה תתקדם, אבל הגדלנו את זה, בסדר?
תודה.
כמעט פי 2. יכולה להגדיל את זה עוד טיפה. Okay, so what is the is operating doing? So let's assume I have two lists, okay? First list is this A, and the second list is 1, 2, 3. Okay, I'm making these two lists identical on purpose. Okay, and let's see what it's printing if I do this. What do you think it will print?
True.
Okay, so it should print true. Of course it printed true. And let's see what it's printing if I do this. Okay, so this is giving me a false value. Okay. And to understand this has to do with how memory is allocated in Python. Okay. And this is telling me that although these two objects are technically identical, they occupy different places in Python's memory. Okay, they are distinct objects in memory. So to understand this, let's print what we call the ID of these two objects. Okay, and the ID is giving me basically it's a memory, it's an identifier in the memory. Okay, so you see that although these two objects are identical, they have different IDs. Okay, and this is to say that they are distinct in memory. So the is operator is actually the same as the following operator, IDB. Okay, this is equivalent to the is operator. Okay, and of course, if I run this, it's going to tell me it's false because these two IDs are not the same. Okay, so this is something you should be aware of and be careful about, because very often we confuse the is operator and the 2 times equal operator, and they are not exactly the same. Okay. Now, why is it important? You could ask me, okay, so why shall I ever use the is operator at all, right? So if I now do A equal B, okay, and this means I allocated the value of B to the variable A, okay? So let's now see A is B, okay, and this now is true. Okay, if I now print the ID of A and the ID of B, they are now the same. Okay, so if I summarize, setting two values to be identical will make this true, okay? But it's not enough in order to put them at the same location in memory, okay? Whereas if I do this, okay, if I set these two values to be equal, not only their values will be identical, but they will also sit in the same place in memory, okay? And if they are if they are the same in memory, the is operator will give me a true answer. Okay, so this is an important thing to remember. Let's make some room. Okay, so
יכולה לחזור על A שווה A, כאילו print A is B ועם ה-ID לא הספקתי, לא לקחתי.
איזה חלק? לא הבנת.
של ה-print A is B ומבוא שאת עושה A שווה ל-B
Okay, I'm going to say it one more time. Maybe I'll say it in Hebrew. Is it okay for the non-Hebrew speaker? You understood? I'll say it in Hebrew, okay? אתה שומע?
כן, כן.
אוקיי, ה-is אופרטור הוא אומר לי אם דברים הם זהים בזיכרון של פייתון. לא רק אם הם זהים באופן אבסולוטי, אלא גם אם הם יושבים באותו מקום בזיכרון. אוקיי? אם הגדרתי שני משתנים ככה, אז הם יהיו זהים, הדבר הזה יהיה נכון, אבל הם לא יושבים באותו מקום בזיכרון. ולכן A is B ייתן לי false. לעומת זאת, אם אני כותבת את הדבר הבא ובעצם מכריחה אותם להיות זהים על ידי המשפט הזה, אז לא רק שהם יהיו זהים, הם גם ישבו באותו מקום בזיכרון, ואז ברגע שהם יושבים באותו מקום בזיכרון, אז גם ה-A is B ייתן לי true. בסדר?
ו-ID זה ה...
וה-ID זה נותן לי את הכתובת של משתנה בזיכרון. אוקיי? אז לכן הראיתי את ה-ID בשביל להראות לכם מה הסיבה העמוקה ש-A is B הוא יכול לתת false במקרים מסוימים, למרות שהמשתנים הם לכאורה זהים. בסדר?
אבל ה-ID שעכשיו יש משותף לשניהם הוא חדש.
נכון.
אז מה קרה לשניים הקודמים?
נכון.
אז מה קרה להם?
רגע, האם הוא חדש? לא, הוא לא חדש בעצם.
הוא לא אחד, כי קודם זה היו שניים.
לא, הוא לא חדש, פשוט מה שזה עשה זה שזה נתן ל-B את ה-ID של A.
ואז מה קרה ל-ID של B?
נמחק. בסדר? נתן לו ID חדש. Okay, so let's move back to English. Okay, so with Boolean, the important thing is to understand that there are many things that are true by default. Okay? Actually, everything that is not false is true. And why it sounds like a very trivial sentence, but why do I say this? Because there is a small list of things that are false by default. Okay, and if you know them, everything else is true by default, and it's important to keep this in mind. Okay, so I'm making some room now. Okay, so what I want to do now is false and true by default. Okay, so what is the list of things that are false by default? Okay, I'm going to write a small conditional statement to make this clearer, okay? So let's set a condition to false, okay? Condition equal false, print if, okay, I'll write if condition print evaluated to true, and else print evaluated to false. Okay, so there are 4 things that are evaluated to false by default. Okay, and all the rest are true. So the first thing that is evaluated to false is simply the false boolean. Okay, so let's run this. Okay, so if I set condition to false, then of course Python evaluates this thing to false. Okay, so this is the most evident one. But there is a list of other things that are evaluated to false and that are less straightforward, and I want to go through this list with you. So the other thing is none, okay? Something that is none is seen by Python as false if you put it inside the condition, okay? So if I run it now, it will evaluate this to false. Okay, so we talked about false, we talked about none. If I do, we tried with the Boolean. Let's try now with another variable type. What happens if I set the condition to 0? Okay.
Give you false.
0 is evaluated to false, although it's not a Boolean technically, but it's the numerical value. This numerical value is set to false. What if I do 4? Okay, 4 is true. Anything non-zero is evaluated to true.
And also everything is not none.
No, because 0 is not none. So there is no non-opposite.
קודם אמרת שגם אם את מכניסה none, אז זה נותן...
נכון, אבל 0 זה לא none, ועדיין הוא אומר שזה 0.
אבל אני אומר מילים שהן לא none.
אבל none זה לא מילה, none זה לא string, okay? This is an important point here. You see that when I entered none, I didn't enter it like this, okay? I didn't enter none as a string, I entered it as a data type, okay? None is set to false. Now let's see what happens if I give it a string, okay?
Question?
Yes.
In the first example...
Yes, go ahead.
In the first example, you set condition to be false. So the if condition checks if it's true or false, right? So it doesn't have to give you true because it checks if it's false or true. In the first example.
In the first
example.
You mean with that?
No.
Before I did this?
No. We set condition to be false at the beginning.
Okay. So what about it?
So the condition checks if it's true or false.
Okay.
So is it true or false?
No. So if condition, this is implying if condition equal true. Okay. To write if condition is the same as writing if condition equal true. Okay, it's a more compact way to write it. Okay, okay. So we spoke about false. We spoke about none. What happened if I give it a string? Hello is true. Okay, but actually a string is just one example of another kind of data type, okay? A string is actually a sequence. You remember that we spoke about lists. So strings can be seen as lists. If you remember, we accessed strings, we accessed letters inside a string in the same way we accessed a list, right? We said hello 0, it gave us the H, etc. So actually any empty sequence, okay? Whether it's an empty string, an empty list, an empty tuple, an empty dictionary, is set to false by default, okay? Let's look at this. So this is an empty list, okay? This is an empty string. This is evaluated to false too. This is an empty tuple, okay? And if I put here 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 4, this is going to be evaluated to true, okay? And an empty dictionary. Do you remember how to write a dictionary? Like this. Okay, this is false. But if I put here name Tama, this is gonna be true because it's not empty. Okay, so these are the ones to keep in mind, and everything else, okay, is set to true. Everything that is not false, none, 0, or an empty sequence is true according to Python. Okay? Good. So this actually ends what I wanted to tell you about Boolean. And now we're going to talk about we're gonna wrap things about loops. We didn't do loops yet, right? So we're gonna wrap what we saw about loops and give a few more examples, and then we will talk about functions. This is really very important. So we touched already the loop subjects, right? When we spoke about lists, and I want to summarize what we discussed and so I want to summarize what we discussed already and add a few things in the loop under the loop subchapter. Okay, so let's recap what we discussed already. So we had a list of numbers, for example, okay, and I showed you how to look through a list. Okay, so we did for any numbers, print and okay, and we spoke about the fact that we could really put anything here. We could also have cake here. Okay, I showed you that it would work with the cake as long as this ni thing is a local. It's only defined within this loop syntax. Okay. So let's actually remind ourselves. So for cake in numbers, print cake. Okay, so let's run this. It's doing the same. Okay. Okay. So this is what we discussed already. Looping through a list. Okay. Now I want to give you guys a few additional features of looping through a list. So there is an important feature called the break feature. Okay. So let's give an example. So for ni in numbers, and I want to tell it to only print things as long as the number is smaller than a certain value. Okay, and then I don't want it to continue. I want it to stop after it's reached a certain value. So I will write if ni is equal to 2, print ni. Else, okay, and the way let's make it more explicit. I found A2 in my list. Okay, and once it's done that, once it's found the 2, I want it to stop. Okay, so I will write this break statement that tells it to go out of the loop once it realizes this condition. Okay. And I still wanted to print the numbers. So let's see what I get here. Yeah, print ni. Let's make it 3. It's going to be more explicit. Okay, so what happened here? It went through all the numbers in this list. Then, the moment it found the 3, it broke the loop. And why didn't it print? It didn't print, went on to print 4. Why? Because of this break statement. Let's see what happened if I hadn't put this break sentence here. Okay? So, it's going through the list. When it finds the 3, it says I found a 3 in my list, and then it goes on, it prints 3 and 4. Okay? But if I have this break here, it will get out of the loop and it won't execute any of the following commands. Okay? Does that make sense? Imri, I see you doing like this. Make sense? Okay.
רגע, מקודם שזה הדפיס את ה-1 ו-2 ואז את ה-I found the 3 in my list. איך זה הדפיס את 1 ו-2?
It goes to the list, okay, and then if it realizes this condition, it stops. Okay, it doesn't move on to the next iteration of the list. So it basically loops as long as whatever is before the break statement is realized.
ומה שיש אחרי הברייק, זה של הפרינט NI, זה מחשיב את זה או לא?
אם יש break, אז לא. If something is after the break within the loop, it won't be executed because the break thing actually breaks the loop. It takes you out of the loop.
אז איך 1 ו-2 הודפסו?
Because, so, tell me your name again. By the end of the course, I will remember name.
דביר.
Dvir. So Dvir is asking how come it did print 1 and 2. So it did because it went through the loop as long as this condition wasn't realized. What made the break statement, if I had put the break here, of course it wouldn't work, okay? It wouldn't even go through the loop. But if I put this break after this under this condition, then as long as it goes through the loop and doesn't meet this condition, then it will execute things.
בעצם כשזה ב1 ו2 זה לא עובר על, כאילו ה-if לא מתקיים ואז זה מדפיס את NI ומתי שזה מגיע ל3.
Exactly. So there is another interesting one that is related to break, and this is the continue. Yes.
In which line does the command of the loop start? Like, כאילו הלופ נגמר בברייק, אבל איפה הוא מתחיל?
מה הכוונה?
כי אחרי זה בעצם לא יכול יותר להתייחס לזה.
הוא מתחיל, it starts at the first item of the list.
אז לא, אני מתכוון, כי הרי אחרי זה את כותבת פרינט מי וזה כבר לא נותן לך את זה, את כבר לא יכולה להתייחס לזה. אז החל מאיזה מקום את לא יכולה להתייחס.
החל מהמקום שזה once this is realized, it stops. Okay? Now, if I had put the break statement here, okay, let's see what happens in this case. Okay? So, it puts the yes, okay. So in this case, it didn't print this thing. Okay? It broke before it had the time to print this. It's basically breaking at the exact location where you put the break. Okay? Okay. Now there is another interesting one, a feature called the continue feature, and this will ignore the value and skip to the next iteration of the loop. So let's give an example of this. Continue. Okay, so print. I find a 3 and then So let's see what happens here. Okay, so what happens here? What the continue command is telling it is to ignore, okay, if it jumps through the items in this sequence, okay? If it meets a certain condition, it ignores this item. Okay, so here it print 1, it print 2, then it gets to 3, and we're telling it ignore 3. Don't do whatever follows for the item you're currently looking at. Okay, so it didn't print 3, it only printed this sentence. Okay, and if I hadn't put this, it would do 1, 2, skip 3, and then move on to the next item, to the next iteration. Okay, so this is also an interesting one to have in mind. Okay, now let's see what happens when we put a loop within a loop. Okay, so this is a new subject, nested loops, sorry. Nested loops. Okay, okay, so, and this will happen quite often. So if I do for ni in numbers, okay, and I now want to put an additional loop, okay, so for letter in A, B, C, okay, I'm telling it to print number 0, okay, so what happens now? So this is something that you should be really familiar from other languages. It's doing the same in all languages, but basically it's starting with the first item in the first sequence, okay? And then it goes to all items in the second sequence. So it stops at 1, prints ABC, then move to 2, print ABC, etc., etc. Okay, so this is just to show you what we get with a nested list. כן, אני מבינה, אתה תיכוניסט? כן.
עם העתקה פשוט.
אני מבינה, אבל אני לא יכולה להעיד את הקצב בגלל אני שולחת את כל מה שאני כותבת, ראית? העליתי סיכומים, אני שולחת הכל. אפשר גם לבקש ממישהו פה שאולי יעשה איזשהו סיכום, אבל אני לא יכולה להעיד יותר את הקצב, אני מצטערת. אני יכולה לענות על שאלות אם משהו לא ברור, בכיף. טוב? מצטערת. יש לי סילבוס שאני צריכה לעמוד. אוקיי, אז זה היה nested loop. Okay, so there is another interesting thing to have in mind. What if I want to run a loop a certain number of time? Okay, so there is something called range, okay, which is very, very neat. So I can do for I in, you'll understand in a second what it means. In range 10, print I. Okay, so range is basically a sequence of 10 numbers, okay, starting at 0 and ending at 9. Okay, for all the MATLAB lovers, okay, this is slightly different. So let's say I want to do something 10 times. Okay, I can use this range thing to basically repeat something. Okay, and this is printed high 10 times. Okay, so this range one is really important. Now you can play with this. Let's say you wanted to start at 1 and finish at 11. Okay, so the syntax is the following. Okay, this will start at 1 and finish 1 before 11. Okay, it's always finishing 1 before the second, one item before the second number. Okay, so range includes, it's like a list. It includes the first item and doesn't include the last one. Okay, we've seen that before. Okay, so this was for the range function. We'll see in a minute that range is actually part of the Python standard library. We'll see, if not this time, then next time, what we mean exactly by standard library. And one more thing that we didn't touch yet is the while loop. So you spoke about while loops in the tutorial?
Not yet.
No.
Also, Rinat, did you do this morning? The people who had the tutorial already, did you do while loops? No? Okay. So let's show you what a while loop is, but this also is something that you might be familiar with from your previous life as a programmer in another language, which you will never want to go back to after we finish this course. So let's see what we mean by a while loop. So while example. Okay. Okay. So let's set the variable x to 0. Okay. And so just as a quick introduction, the loop we talked about until now were all starting with the word for. Okay, we had the sequence and we told Python 4 items in sequence do ta ta ta. Okay, now we're talking about a slightly different loop with a slightly different syntax. And here, what we want to do is tell Python, go through this sequence as long as a certain condition is realized. Okay? And in order to do this, we use what we call while loops. Okay? And the following, the sentence for these loops is slightly different. It works in the following way. So I write while a condition, for example, x smaller than 10, okay? Print x. Print x is smaller than 10, okay? And then add 1 to x incrementally. You remember that we spoke about this compact way to add, okay? This is similar to writing x equal x plus 1, okay? But because it's such a common thing, the Python developer invented a more compact way to write it, okay? So let's see what happens now. I'm running this. Okay, so it's basically starting at 0. Let's separate it. Okay, so starting at 0, adding 1, okay, and it's doing it until x, as long as x is strictly smaller than 10, okay? If I had here a smaller or equal, okay, it would go on until 10. Okay. Okay. Now let's do a mix of what we just spoke about, the break statements, okay, and this while loop. So I do if x is smaller than 5, break. Okay, so this will interrupt the loop. And I now want to put this after this sentence to see where exactly it breaks. Now this one is important here in a while loop, otherwise what happens?
Eternal.
It will go on forever. Okay, so this thing is important. When actually, it's a good practice when you write while loops to make sure that your loop is not running in forever. Okay, that there is something that modifies the condition in a way that it won't be evaluated to true forever and ever. So let's see what happens here. Okay, so it prints x. It prints that x is smaller than 10. Okay. But although here the while condition was telling it to do it until x reaches 10, because of this break statement, it interrupted it before this condition became true. Okay, is it clear for everybody? Okay, the break here broke the loop before this condition was realized. Okay, it stopped when it reached 5.
יש לי שאלה, אם את רוצה...
שם ושם.
ליאור. אם את רוצה ש-x יהיה קטן מ-10, אז למה את לא עושה פשוט קטן מ-10? שזה קטן שווה מ-10, הוא עדיין ירוץ ו...
Absolutely. So Lior is asking if you want the loop to stop when it reaches 5, why not put here a 5? I could do this, of course, but I wanted to show you the effect of a break statement within a while statement.
within a while. שאלה אחרת, שאת אומרת ש-x is smaller than 10, נכון? ואז כשאת עושה x קטן שווה מ-10, שהוא יגיע ל-10, הוא עוד פעם ירוץ לך, ועוד פעם הוא ידפיס לך x קטן מ-10 כשהוא יהיה 10.
לא הבנתי.
למה את לא עושה קטן? למה את עושה קטן שווה?
פשוט כי רציתי להראות לכם שאם אני עושה ככה הוא עוצר ב9, ואם אני עושה קטן שווה אז הוא מגיע, זה אינקלוזיב, זה מגיע ל10. פשוט זה אומר קטן מ10 או שווה ל10, ופשוט רציתי להדגים לכם את ההבדל בין strictly smaller and smaller or equal, okay? Okay, so let's do a small experiment and see what happens if we make an infinite loop, okay? Okay, I don't want to do this now, and the reason is that I don't know what's the equivalent of Control-C in PyCharm. Does anyone know? Okay, so I'll tell you what your resources if you find yourself in an infinite loop. Okay, in most platform you can do Control-C and it will stop. Okay, I never actually run code directly from PyCharm. I open a terminal and I use PyCharm as an editor and I run code from a terminal. Okay, and then Control-C definitely works. I'm not sure what's the equivalent of Control-C in PyCharm. If someone knows, you can let me know. But on most platforms, Control-C, don't panic, Control-C will do it. Okay? I'll check until next time.
I'm sure it won't make your computer
No,
crash.
it won't do, but it might it might require that I close PyCharm and then we will lose another 5 minutes because I will have to reopen it. And no, it won't break your anything. It just I don't want to have to turn PyCharm off. But this is also if Control-C doesn't work on PyCharm, you can just turn PyCharm off and it will do the same. Okay.
Control F2.
Okay, and we spoke about enumerate loops already, right? You remember the difference? I will just give, so we spoke now about for loops, while loops. I will just quickly remind you what the enumerate loop is doing. So for I, j in enumerate with Okay, so this is just to remind you the third type of loop that we already discussed and which is extremely common and useful. Okay, so this ends the topic of loops. And now we will start a new important topic, which are functions. And maybe we'll even have time to talk about modules and how to import modules in Python. Are there any questions before we start a new topic? Okay, so let's start to speak about functions. Okay, so from your past experience, can someone suggest what a function is? What is it doing? You've used function in the past, Yair?
Yeah, it's a section of code that's usually it's a piece of code that usually returns some kind of number and can accept also a number.
Okay, so Yair suggests that it's a piece of code that can accept a number and returns a number. So I would modify it a bit. It accepts any type of variable, and it returns something, also any type of variable. So functions are basically, we can look at them as black boxes that we define for ourselves. We write functions. And they accept a certain number of arguments, not only one. They can accept n variables. Okay, on one side we put variables, and then they return. They have an output. They return also m. Okay, whichever number of variables that we want. Okay, and why do we want to? So let's give a small example of why functions are so important. Okay, I'll say it, and then I'll show you how to define the function in Python, and we'll give the example. Let's say that you want to print in your code a certain string, for example, good morning. Okay, and you're doing it 100 times in your code. Okay, and then for some reasons you don't want to print good morning anymore. You want it to print good morning everybody. Okay, so if you were just printing the same commands 100 times in your code, you'd have to go at each single instance of this command and change it from good morning to good morning everybody, right? But if you have one function where you define this print whatever you want to print command, okay, and you just call this function 100 times in your code, you can modify locally good morning to good morning everybody, and it will execute this piece of code everywhere you've called it in your code. So this is the reason we use functions. There are ways to define solid things that we tend to repeat over and over in our codes without having to recode them every time, okay, and avoid making errors. So let's see what's the syntax for functions in Python. So I will define this first function. Okay, I will write it, and then we will talk about the sentence in a second. Okay, so you see that the syntax here is the name of the function, then parentheses, and this is where we're going to put some arguments. Okay, and then these 2 points, very important, and they don't necessarily appear in other programming languages. Okay, and the pass here is just something I put here temporarily, because if I don't put anything here, Python complains. Okay, it doesn't want me to define a function that doesn't do anything. Okay, but I don't want to define yet what I want it to do, so I'm just writing pass so that it doesn't give me the error. Okay, and this def thing is just the way you, it's just the syntax that allows you to define a function. Okay? Now, this is how I wrote the function. How do I call this function? How do I make use of this function? I want to emphasize here that we need these two parentheses. Okay? If we don't put these parentheses, okay, you'll see in a minute what happens. What's the difference if we put these parentheses or not? So, okay, let's do it now. So if I do print my first function, and now I put it with parentheses. Okay, let's see what's the difference. Okay, so in the first case, it printed this funny looking thing. Okay, this is actually an object that is the function. Okay, whereas if I put the parentheses, it will return, it will show me whatever this function is returned. Okay, do you understand the difference? So in one case, if you don't put, let's say that the function is a box, okay, and you put inputs at the entrance and you get an output. So if you don't put the parentheses, Python will think that you actually want to refer to the box itself. Okay, if you don't want to refer to the box, and if you want to refer instead to the output of the box, then you need to have these parentheses. Does it make sense? It's the difference between the container and what it contains or what it outputs. Okay? So this is an important one. Okay, now let's start to populate this function. So I will print here, good morning everybody. Okay, so you see that, why is it not working? What is this non thing? Do I have anything left? Yes. Okay. Okay. We'll see in a second why it gave us a none. So this is still, maybe I will remove this in a minute if you understood what happens if I don't put the parentheses. Okay? And now in order to execute the function, I don't need to print it. Okay, this is a call, exactly. This is the difference between the printing and calling. So this will simply call the function, and what happens when we call the function, it will execute whatever is defined as the role of this function. Okay, so it called this function and it executed this command. So as I said before, if I execute this 5 times, okay, it will simply repeat this 5 times, and you see that if I want to slightly change what I wrote here, for example, add these exclamation points, I only need to do it once. I don't need to do it 100 times everywhere in my code where I wanted to write good morning everybody. Okay, so this is why functions are so important. Okay, especially because if I do it 100 times, I might forget one exclamation point in one of these times. Okay, and by doing this way, I'm avoiding this kind of errors. Okay, and this thing it has a name in like programming jargon. Okay, it's called keeping a code dry. okay, keeping a code dry in the jargon of programmers is avoid repetitions as much as possible. Okay, for example, by defining functions for whatever piece of code that you realize is being repeated. Okay, whatever is repetitive, you wrap in a function, and this is what we call keeping a code dry. I discovered it while preparing this lecture. So just to make it pragmatic, as a programmer, you should be aware of things you are doing over and over, okay? And trying to transform these things into functions. Okay, now, this we said is executing the function, okay? But if I do now a print my first function, it will return none. Why? Because here I told Python to execute something, but I didn't define any output for this function. Okay, this function is not outputting anything. It's just executing a command. And in order to output something, I need to add this return statement. And what it will do is that it will put a variable. It will populate my first function variable. Okay, let's give an example. So this function, what is it doing? It's printing good morning everybody. Okay, and it's returning an object, a string. Okay, the string is hello. Okay, so let's see what it does now. Okay, so it's executing whatever is in the function, and this thing has now been populated with the string hello. Okay, if I remove this, it will only show me what's been returned. So this is the output. This is what we get after this black box. Okay, makes sense? And you should be careful that it's returning hello. It's not returning this string. Okay, there is a small subtlety here. Okay, so this should remind you of things that we did before. So do you remember we had a string, let's call it high false. Okay, and you remember that we used this function, the len function. Okay, so len in our case is really a black box. Okay, we don't know exactly how it's doing it, but it's basically receiving as an input this string, and it's outputting the length of this string. Okay, so this is a good example where we look at functions as just black box that return outputs, and you can put several things here. Okay. So if I asked it to return 3 arguments, it will return a tuple. Okay, remember we spoke about tuple and why do we need them at all? So this is a perfect example. I never use tuples, but you need to know what a tuple is because often you'll meet them on the way. So for example here, what it's returning is a tuple. It's an unmutable sequence of these 3 outputs. Okay? And of course, this is a variable, so you can apply to this variable some more functions. So give me a function which we saw is applying to strings. Maybe lowercase. Lower is not changing it because it's already in lowercase, but okay. So this is a variable, it's this string, and you can apply anything that applies to string to the output of this function. Okay? Okay. So
So it's a tuple only if it's a sequence and not a single return?
yes, if I want to return several things, and it will happen that you have a complex function that is doing all kinds of operations, and you want it to return the final result, but also a result on the way. Okay, so you will ask it to return several things, and the way it will be handled by Python is by putting it in a tuple, in a sequence with all these things. So it's important because if you want to access it, okay, let's see here. Let's assume that I have two things at the end. You will access it in the same way as you access any sequence. Okay, so this will return the second. Okay, it's one, so it's the second item in this sequence. Okay, now what we did here, you see that we left this. What's the time? You see that we left here this area blank. This is where we put arguments to our function. And I now want to show you how we pass arguments. So we'll define a function called morning greeting. Okay. And here I'm putting an argument name. Okay. Actually, don't want to print it. I want to return it. Good morning name. How are you today? Okay, and now I'm calling morning greeting. Give me a name. David. Okay.
Do you have a charger?
What happened?
You didn't print.
Ah, right. Okay, so what happened is that it's populated this, but it's not telling me, it's not printing it. Okay? Thank you. Okay, so it printed this new variable. Okay, this variable is a string, and this string depends it depends upon the argument that has been passed. Okay, so this is how we pass argument. Okay, so there is an important thing that we will speak again, touch upon again a bit later, is the scope of the variable name. Okay, by scope I mean within which framework is this variable defined. Okay, and the scope of this variable is only the function. Okay, if I do print name here, it won't know what I'm talking about. It will tell me that name is not defined. Okay, whereas if I print here name is name, okay, it complains because let's do it like this. Okay, so it will tell me name is David, while while running the function, it knows what name is. Okay, But here I asked it about name outside of this function, and here it doesn't know what I'm talking about, so it complains. It's actually a bit weird that it's defining it's complaining before that but this is the way PyCharm is showing us errors, okay? So, but the important thing here is to understand within which limits are arguments defined, and the answer to this is only within the limits of the function that is using these arguments. Okay? So I'll say one more thing and then we'll take a break. So okay, so you can of course define several arguments. Okay, for example, name one and name two, and here okay, 0 and 1. No, let's do it differently. Good morning. And let's define here a question. How are you today? Okay, so name one, name two, and question. Okay, and here I'm putting Tama. And here I will use what is the weather today? Okay, so let's run this and then explain what's happening. Okay, so here I've defined two names. Okay, and it's printing good morning, name one and name two, David and Tamar, and then printing the question. Okay, and it's printing the question, not the question that is defined here, but rather the question that has been defined here and passed as an argument. Okay? Now, let's see.
Why did you do
No, I will explain first and then things will become clear. Okay? If you still have this question after I finish, I will answer, but let me explain a few things first. So, let's see what happens if I don't put anything here. Okay? If I don't put anything here, it will use these two arguments, okay, name one and name two, and it will print this question. Okay? How are you today? Now, this has to do with a difference between two types of arguments that I can pass to a function. The first type is the name one and name two one. Okay, and these are called positional arguments. Okay, positional arguments. Okay. So these are name one and name two. Okay, and there is another type of arguments which are called keywords arguments. Okay, and this is this question. Okay, so do you guys want to take a break or we move on until 11:30? Let's vote. Who wants a break? You all want to finish a bit earlier? Okay. Okay, so I'm fine with it, but I want to see the sparkle in your eyes. No sleeping student, okay? So, okay, so we have these positional arguments here. So these are the arguments that are not defined with this equal sign, okay? And here we have what we call keywords argument. And what these keywords arguments allow you to do is to define default values, okay? And you see that here it's exactly what happens. So let's say that I didn't have any positional argument, okay? And I'm passing it without any argument. It doesn't agree. Okay. So you need at least one positional argument. No, you don't. Wait. Format. No. Okay. Sorry. Maybe I needed a break. Return question. Okay, let's see if it works. Okay, it does work. So you don't need, this is good to know, I just learned something. You don't need a positional argument. And you see that here, what this allowed me to do, this what we call keyword argument, it allowed me to call the function without any argument because it has this default argument here. Okay, you cannot do this with the positional argument. If I put here name 1, okay, and I do this, it will complain. It will tell me you didn't. It will tell me you didn't define the variable that you want to use. Okay, so keywords argument allow you to make use of default values. Okay, so this is an important one.
Can you change the keyword argument
Of course.
afterwards?
Of course. No, you cannot change the default value, but you can change the value of the keyword argument. This is what we did here. But you cannot change the default is actually defined when you define the function.
It's defined strictly. You can't change it when you call the function. I mean,
when you call the function, either you call it with the new value for the keyword argument. For example, let's do it. Okay, so. What is the weather? Okay. What does it complain about?
The format also.
Okay, so you can change the argument. You can change the variable here, but what you can't change is the value of the default keyword argument. Okay. So what we'll do the last few minutes, maybe we'll even have time to talk about modules, is a slightly more advanced topic. Okay, you might come across this kind of function. So okay, I have a function called person. Okay, and you might come across this kind of syntax, and I'm sure I'm writing it here so that you don't, you're not scared when you see it. Okay, so I will write it and then. Okay, so this syntax allows me to pass an arbitrary number of arguments. Okay, let's assume that for some reason you want to write a function and you don't want to write in advance how many positional arguments or how many keyword arguments it will accept. Okay, you want to leave it open. So you can use this sentence, okay? Args is for positional arguments and quargs is for keywords arguments, okay? KY, keyword. And of course, this we said can be cake and I don't know, muffin. I mean, these things they don't live outside of this function, but this is a convention, a very commonly used convention, so we will use it here too. And this allows you to use arbitrary numbers of arguments. So let's try, for example, the following. So person info is equal to trying to give you a good example. So tall, fat, or let's say blue eyes, and then name equal David and age equal 68. Okay. Okay, so here what I did is I'm calling this function where I didn't define in advance how many arguments of each kind I have. And let's see what happens. Okay, so it's printing the positional arguments. These are the two positional arguments. And it's putting them in a tuple. You see that here I have a tuple with the positional arguments. Okay, and here the keywords argument, it puts them in a dictionary. So name is David and age is 68. Okay, and it's returning none because I didn't ask it to return anything.
How does it know which ones are keyword arguments? What makes them keyword arguments? How do you know these are keyword arguments?
What do you mean? It's this syntax. It's this star and double star thing.
No, it's in name and age.
How do you know to stop after tall and blue eyes? That's it.
How does it know what? To stop after blue eyes?
And then
because in the syntax, okay, because in the syntax of a function, it recognizes that whatever, if an argument has an equal sign in it, it will read it as a keyword argument.
Oh, okay, so that's a new thing.
What?
We didn't know that before. Just mentioned it before.
That's what?
That if the argument has an equal.
Okay. Okay, so if it wasn't clear, I will show it again. So
predefined set of words you can use.
So what is the difference between a positional argument and the keyword argument? Okay, if it wasn't clear, the difference is that the positional argument will just be defined as these variables, and the keyword argument will be defined as a keyword that actually defines the variable name and a value. Okay, and this is what allows me to pre-populate them with default values.
If I call a regular function of regular positional arguments with an equal sign, what's going to happen?
If you call,
if I call the other function you had, my morning reading.
mm-hmm.
If I would call that function, and in the first variable, I put like something equals David, name equals David, what would happen?
Okay, so first, this is something that this is the next thing I wanted to say. When you call a function, Python will always require you to first call the position, to first put the positional arguments and then the keywords argument. And this is why it's complaining here. Okay, it doesn't want anything that looks like a keyword argument and then something that looks like a positional argument. What you could do is have this, okay? If you do this, it won't complain. Okay, so now the difference is that here, of course, you can write name one equal David, okay? So when you call the function, it makes it look as a positional argument. And if I only see this line without seeing the way you define the function, I won't be able to know if this is a positional or a keyword argument. But if you look at the definition of the function, the positional argument here doesn't have any default value to it, whereas the keyword argument does. And this is the difference. Okay, so you don't have to use both. If I try to summarize it, you can use only positional arguments, but then you won't have the option of setting, of pre-populate them with a default value. Okay, this is one important thing. The second important thing is that if you have mixed arguments, which are positional and keywords arguments, okay, when you call such a function, you always need to put first the positional argument and then the keyword argument. And you can put the positional arguments in different order or the keyword argument in different orders, but you need the positional one first. Okay? Now, by the way, another reason you might want to put name 1 equal David, name 2 equal David is if for some reason you want to change the order. So, name 2 question. Okay, so let's say I want to put here Tamar first, but as the second positional argument.
You have a comma there.
Why is it not? Yeah. Okay. So this would be a good reason to use the equal sign even for positional arguments, because if I only put Tamar and David, okay, it would interpret this as name 1 and David as name 2. Okay, if for some reason I want David to be name 2 and Tamar to be name 2, and if I want to modify the order, then this is a good reason to specify here which arguments I'm talking about. Okay, but we've mixed here several things. So bottom line, keywords arguments are for arguments for which you want to be able to define a default value. Okay, you can always specify, even for positional argument, you can specify to the function which argument you're referring to. Okay, even if it's a positional argument, you can write the name of the argument equal blah. You don't have to. If you don't do it, then Python will just read this in the order in which you define the function. Okay, and this is something maybe slightly esoteric, but I want you guys to know what it's doing, because you might come across this, okay, where these things allow you to define a function where you don't know in advance how many arguments you will have, whether they are positional or keyword argument, and you want to be able to modify this on the go. Okay, so this is the way you would write such a function. Yes.
Why in the end it gives you none?
It's giving me none because I didn't ask it to return anything. If I do a return high, it won't give me none. Okay. Okay, so there is one more subtlety about this, but I think Okay, I don't think we actually need this. Okay. So we have 3 minutes left. So in these 3 minutes, I will just give you a short introduction to what we will discuss next time and over and over during the course. A very nice feature of Python is that it has a ton of predefined functionalities that you don't need to recode. Okay, this is called the standard library. So there is a large library of modules. We will see what we mean exactly by modules next time. But for now, you can see module as a function that has been defined somewhere, okay, not within your code. It has its own life somewhere, and you can import it to your code. You can basically have a short sentence. Let's give an example, okay? So this is a package called OS. Let's use it. Let's use math. So this is a package called math. And I want it let's say I want to have the value in radians of let's do something even simpler. Let's assume I want to print the value of pi, okay? So I add this sentence in the beginning of my code. It's calling what we will see next time. It's calling a module. Okay, it's a package, something that has been written before by other people, and I can make use of this thing in my code. Okay, and this is one of the big strengths of Python, is that there are tons and tons of things like this, of modules like this, that have been coded and optimized by the best programmers in the world, okay, which you can use in your own code, just by calling them at the beginning of your code. Okay, so next time what we will see is what we have in what we call the standard library, which is a library of functionalities that you get on your computer the minute you install Python, and you don't have to install them. Okay, so we will see what you have by default, which kind of module you can use by default. Then we will see how you can write your own module, okay, if it's something that hasn't been coded yet, and import it and use it in a code. So, for example, if you want to create a library of functions that you can use in many different projects and many different code, we'll see how to do this. Okay? Have a good week.
Thank you. Thank you very much.